The prairie was silent until a half-naked man collapsed in front of a lonely widow's ranch. Blood ran down his hip, staining the dry grass as if the earth itself wanted to swallow him. His chest rose and fell in agony. His lips cracked open with a single whisper, "Take it off." Evelyn Harper froze. She was only 39, a woman still carrying the shadow of her husband's fresh grave. The whole town had watched her bury him just weeks ago, and already she was seen as weak prey. Now another man lay at her door, stranger, broad-shouldered, scarred, and bleeding out fast. If she dragged him inside, every eye in town would judge her. If she left him outside, he would surely die before sunrise. Her hands trembled between shame and mercy. Evelyn had always been strong enough to survive whispers, but never strong enough to silence them. The widow's cabin stood lonely on the edge of the settlement. Neighbors had warned her that living alone invited trouble, and now trouble had collapsed right in front of her door. She bent down closer, her heart hammering louder than the crickets in the grass. The man's eyes met hers, dark, filled with pain, but also a desperate plea. He had no weapon in his hand, only blood soaking his side. "Take it off," he breathed again. Evelyn understood. He wanted her to tear cloth to press against the bullet wound before he bled out. Her fingers hovered over his belt, over the fabric she would have to cut away. No one had touched her in months, not since the coffin closed, and left her nights colder than the desert wind. Her breath caught as shame clashed with instinct. In the distance, she swore, she could feel the weight of the town's gossip already sharpening like knives. What would they say if she let a stranger in? What would they whisper if they saw her tending his bare flesh with her own hands? The choice pressed harder than the barrel of any gun. She looked at the horizon. The sky was burning gold with the last light of day. Coyotes cried far away as if mocking her hesitation. The man groaned and clutched at his wound. Time was running thin. Evelyn clenched her jaw. If she turned her back, she would live with another ghost in her house. If she acted, she would live with the town's hatred instead. Her heart raced as she reached for her sewing shears tucked into her apron. She lowered them to his hip and sliced the fabric away in one sharp motion. The sight of torn skin and blood made her gasp. The man shuddered, but his gaze never left her face. There was no shame in his eyes, only trust. Evelyn pressed the cloth hard against his wound, her hands finally steady. For the first time since her husband's death, she felt the weight of choice, heavy and alive. The dry grass rustled in the wind. A new story had already begun, and she was standing in the middle of it. But could a widow broken by loss risk her name, her safety, and her soul for a stranger who might bring nothing but more ruin? Evelyn dragged the stranger inside her cabin. The room smelled of wood smoke and old grief. She laid him on her late husband's bed, and for a moment her heart twisted at the memory. The man groaned when she pressed the cloth tighter against his hip. He was still bleeding, but he was alive. Alive because she had chosen him over her own reputation. His name was Jack Callahan. That was the first thing he told her when the fever eased. His voice was rough like gravel, but steady. He thanked her with eyes that held no shame, only gratitude. Evelyn tried to stay calm, but she felt something shift inside her. It had been months since anyone had looked at her with anything but pity or hunger. Jack looked at her like she mattered, but the peace inside that little cabin did not last long. Roy Harper came knocking the very next day. Roy was her late husband's brother. He never came with kindness, he always came with need. Evelyn opened the door just enough to block his view. Roy leaned against the frame, grinning like he owned the place. He asked what she was hiding. His eyes slid past her shoulder toward the shadows of the bed. Evelyn's heart thumped hard. Jack was too weak to stand. If Roy stepped in, he would see everything. Roy called her a lonely widow. Said the town was already whispering about her, said she needed a man to keep her safe and he was the only family left. The smell of whiskey on his breath made her stomach turn. Evelyn told him to leave, but Roy only laughed. He warned her that widows who played games often ended up ruined. When the door finally closed behind him, her hands shook so badly she could barely tie the cloth around Jack's wound. Jack caught her wrist gently. He told her not to let men like that break her spirit. His words were soft but firm, and they settled in her chest like a small fire. Still, the danger was clear. If Roy returned and found Jack here, it would not just be gossip. It would be war. That night, Evelyn sat by the fire, staring at the flames. Jack slept fitfully, mumbling through the fever. Her thoughts raced faster than the wind outside. Had she saved a man who would only bring more trouble? Or had she finally found someone willing to stand between her and the darkness that had haunted her since the funeral? The crickets went quiet. Even the night seemed to be waiting for her answer. And when heavy footsteps crunched on the dirt outside her cabin again, Evelyn knew trouble was already back at her door. Morning came slow and heavy. Evelyn stepped out to fetch water, and the air already carried whispers. Two women at the well glanced her way, then leaned close and muttered. She did not have to hear the words to know what they meant. The town had eyes everywhere. By noon the gossip had grown legs and walked straight through every doorway in Dry Creek. The widow Hopper had taken a man into her house, stranger at that. Some said he was a drifter. Others said he was an outlaw on the run. One man swore he saw blood on his shirt when Evelyn dragged him inside. It did not take long before the whispers turned cruel. They said she had moved on too soon. They said maybe Jack Callahan was the reason her husband was in the ground at all. Evelyn tried to hold her head high when she walked to the mercantile for flour. But the stairs burned hotter than the midday sun. Children giggled, old men shook their heads, even the preacher turned away. When she returned home, Jack was awake, sitting up against the wall, his face pale but determined. He asked why her hands were trembling. She tried to brush it off, but Jack was not fooled. He told her that small towns love two things more than God. They love their secrets and they love their scapegoats. She laughed bitterly 'cause he was right. Then his eyes softened and he added that sometimes all it takes to outlast gossip is to stare it down and never blink. That sounded simple, but it was not easy for a widow living alone, especially when Roy came back with venom in his voice. He told anyone who would listen that Jack had killed his brother. He claimed he had proof, though he never showed any. Folks wanted a story to believe, and Roy handed them one. Soon, even oldest friends stopped calling on her. The market stalls went quiet when she passed. At church pews emptied near her row, Jack saw it all, and his jaw tightened more each day, but he could barely stand without pain tearing through his side. He was a fighter, trapped in a body that refused to fight. One night, as the fire cracked low, Evelyn asked him why he had come to this part of the prairie. His eyes flickered in the firelight. He said he had been chased across 3 counties by men who wanted him dead, but not because he was guilty, because he had seen something he was not supposed to. He did not share more, but the weight in his voice told her it was truth. Evelyn sat back in silence, realizing she had taken in a man hunted not only by bullets, but by lies just like her, 2 souls marked by rumor, 2 people learning how heavy words can cut, and still she knew that tomorrow would bring sharper tongues and crueler stares. Would Jack be strong enough to stand beside her when the whole town wanted them apart? If you are still here with me, take a slow sip of your tea and breathe easy. I wonder what time it is where you are and from what place you're listening right now. And if this story has kept your heart awake, do not forget to tap that subscribe so you will never miss the rest of Jack and Evelyn's fight. The rumors spread faster than prairie fire. By the 4th week, Evelyn could hardly walk through town without feeling the sting of every stare. Jack noticed, and it burned him worse than the bullet still healing in his hip. He had spent his life fighting men with guns. Now he had to fight words sharper than steel, but words alone were not the danger. Roy Harper had grown bold. He no longer bothered to hide his visits. One evening, as the sun dipped low, Evelyn heard the heavy stomp of boots outside. Before she could reach the door, Roy shoved it open and stepped inside without asking. His eyes went straight to Jack, who sat propped against the wall with a pistol resting beside him. Roy sneered at the sight. "So this is the outlaw you risk everything for?" Evelyn told him to leave, but Roy only grinned wider. He claimed Jack had murdered his brother and stolen the widow's heart for his own gain. The words were poison, and Evelyn felt her knees weaken. Jack's hand slid slow toward the pistol, his body still weak, but his will sharp as ever. Roy stepped closer, his breath sour with whiskey. He reached for Evelyn's arm, and that was enough. Jack forced himself to his feet, the pain tearing across his hip. He pointed the pistol square at Roy's chest. "If you want her, you go through me." The cabin went silent, except for Jack's ragged breathing. Evelyn's eyes widened at the sight of a man half-broken, still standing tall between her and danger. Roy's grin faded, though pride kept him from showing fear. He spat on the floor and muttered that this was not over. Then he stormed out, slamming the door so hard the windows rattled. But Roy did not vanish into the night. 2 days later, he returned on horseback, drunk and armed. He fired a shot into the air right outside the cabin and shouted that the widow was his by right. Neighbors peeked from their windows, but none dared step in. Jack staggered out into the yard, pale and limping. Yet his pistol stayed firm in his grip. The sight of him standing tall, even half-broken, made Roy's hand falter. The bully cursed and rode off, but everyone knew he would not forgive this shame. Jack collapsed back into the chair, his body shaking with pain. Evelyn rushed to his side, pressing her hands against his shoulder to steady him. For the first time, she whispered his name, not as a stranger, but as a man she trusted, Jack Callahan. He looked at her, and in that moment both of them knew the line had been crossed. This was no longer about whisper, it was about survival. The town might believe Roy's lies, and Roy would surely come back with more than words next time. So what choice would Jack and Evelyn make now that the fight had truly begun? Jack could still feel the ache in his side, but he no longer cared. Pain was nothing compared to the weight of Evelyn's hand holding tight to his. The woman who once carried grief like a chain now carried her head high. They walked into town together. Every step felt like a battle. Eyes followed them from the mercantile to the saloon. Whispers circled like buzzards, but neither of them bowed. Evelyn's chin stayed steady. Her grip never faltered. Jack's gaze met every stare calm as steel. At first, the townsfolk mocked louder, thinking shame would break them, but shame never came. Instead, a strange silence grew. Some neighbors who once sneered now lowered their eyes. Few even nodded with quiet respect, as if they saw something braver than gossip. One morning at the market, Roy cornered Evelyn in front of everyone. His hand clamped down hard on her arm while cruel words spilled from his mouth. Before the crowd could even blink, Jack stepped forward, still limping from his wound. His voice cut through the noise, steady and sharp. "Let her go." The street fell silent. The whispers that once painted Jack as a villain now painted Roy as the brute. For the first time, the townsfolk saw the truth with their own eyes. Weeks passed and Jack's wound turned to a scar. Evelyn's sorrow turned to strength. What began with blood in the dirt grew into something no rumor could kill. They had chosen each other, not because it was easy, not because it was safe, but because love demanded courage. Their story reminds us of a truth older than the Wild West itself. People will always talk. Some will twist lies until they sound like scripture, but at the end of the day, you decide whether to carry their judgment or to carry your own truth. Ask yourself this: if you stood in Evelyn's shoes, could you walk through town while the world whispered behind you? If you stood in Jack's boots, could you raise your head even when your body was broken? Would you defy the crowd for the one person who makes your life worth living? These are the questions their story leaves with us. And if their fight for love has touched your heart, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe so you will not miss the next tale from the frontier. But before I leave you tonight, I want to share something from my heart. I have read many of your comments. Some of you watch these stories deep into the night. It warms me to know you are here, but I also hope you will take care of yourselves. Let these videos be a piece of comfort in the quiet hours, but do not forget to rest early when you can. Your health is worth more than gold. I must also admit I cannot reply to every comment as often as I wish. I'm not young anymore. Editing leaves me tired, but your kindness in the comments carries me through the nights. So, thank you for walking this trail with me. Now, tell me in the comments, and if you were in their place, would you stand tall against the whole town, or would you walk away?